Evening. This week we're starting a little late. Had a couple of technical problems. Kind of embarrassing thing for a programmer to admit to, but that's the way things are going. Um, while I wait for more people to come to get started with the actual shear, I thought I'd share this thought. I saw in a tshuva by Rav Asher Weiss. So there are discussions of what exactly is prohibited about copyright violations. How are copyright violations prohibited by the Torah? So there are a number of often stated models. Either it could be hasagat gavul, that one is encroaching on somebody else's business. It could be dina de malchuta dina, the obligation to obey the laws of the country you're in. Rav Asher Weiss has a different model based on this week's parsha. So it says that Hashem saw that the whole world was filled with Hamas, which is destruction. The fact that there's an organization by the same name is pure coincidence. But in any case, so the world was filled with Hamas, and Hashem decided to destroy it. And the Gemara says that what is Hamas? Hamas is each one would, let's say, if there's a grape vendor, each one would steal one grape. The person comes by, he takes a grape, he eats it, he walks on. There's no consideration for another person's property. But what Rav Asher Weiss points out is that there is no, what Rav Asher Weiss points out is that what each person is stealing is worth less than a pruta. It's worth less than the smallest coin of the time, meaning less than one quantum of money. So people are stealing, but they're not stealing anything that actually has value. Still, at the end of the day, the person's out of their income. So Rav Asher Weiss says that is the sin of copyright violation. It is Hamas, just like the generation of the flood. Each person, by stealing a copy of, let's say, a song or a program, they're not taking anything of value. It is not Shava Pruta, because halacha just doesn't recognize intellectual property. But they are, through this stealing something of less than value, accumulate until the person doesn't have income. And therefore it is just like what's it called? The generation of the flood, and then he goes on to discuss how totally terrible it is to bootleg or pirate software. Okay, so with that little stall out of the way, let's look at the Meshekh Chokhmah. So the first pasuk in the Parshas Noach says, Eila toldos Noach. These are the generations of Noach, or perhaps these are the effects of Noach, because tolada means a child, but it also means an outcome. Noach ish tzaddik. Noach was a righteous man. Tamim haya b'darasav. He was whole. He was perfect in his generations. Esa Elokim hisalech Noach. And Noach walked himself with God. So there's a little emphasis there in the way I translated hisalech. Hisalech is hitpa, which means something you do to yourself. And there's an emphasis there on the phrasing hisalech that there's a free will element. He didn't just go with God, he took himself with God. But in any case, that's not the point the Meshekh Chokhmah emphasizes this week. That more ties to last week's discussion. So this week, this is what he writes. Tzaddik tamim b'dorasav. He picks up on the word dorasav, his generations. So what are the generations in plural of Noach? Not a very startling question if you just think how long the man lived. There must have been numerous generations overlapping. But that's not the approach that the Meshekh Chokhmah takes. Hine shnei doros hayu. There were two generations. Dor echad shalifnei hamabul. There was the generation that lived before the flood. V'dor shala'achar hamabul. And the generation born after the flood. Because after all, these two generations only overlapped by Noach, his wife, their sons, and their wives. Ubi Gemara, and in the Gemara it says, Tamim b'drachav, tzadik b'masav, that he was tamim in his ways, and he was tzaddik in his actions. So this is the Gemara. The Gemara says, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Itcha, you should take with you, b'domin l'cha. Itcha was with you mean things are similar to you. V'dilma Noach gufei treifa hava. Maybe Noach was injured, was not in well health, had an injury that may impact his survival. So it says tamim ksiv bei. It says in our verse that he was tamim. He was whole. V'dilma tamim b'drachav haya. But maybe that's only referring to the fact that we know that he was good in his ways. Tzaddik ksiv bei. Well, it says he was a tzaddik. Dilma tamim b'drachav tzaddik b'masav hava. Maybe it only means that he was tamim in his ways and tzaddik in his actions. Lo sakadatach, denach gufei treifa hava. You shouldn't think that he was a treifa in body, that he was mortally injured in his body. Because if you would have thought that he was, Amalei Rachmana, Kavasech Ayil Shlamin Lo Tayil. Would the pasuk have said only take injured animals that are not going to survive the year and not any healthy ones? So that conclusion's absurd, and therefore the Torah, the Gemara concludes that Noach must have been taking only healthy animals. But the point along the way that we're using here is tamim refers to a person's ways, his behavior, his character, and tzaddik refers to a person's actions. Rashi on this Gemara says, tamim b'drachav, anav, that he was modest, ushval ruach, and held himself low. Tzaddik b'masav, he was righteous in his actions, below chamas, without the chamas that we were talking about of the whole generation. So, to continue back with the Meshekh Chokhmah, after he quotes Rashi, V'hinei b'dor shelifnei hamabul, the generation before the Mabul, hayuma loso, what was Noach's great heights? Shahaya below chamas, that he didn't commit the chamas, that shekulam hayu chomsin, they were all ripping each other off, ushtufim ba'arayos, and they were busy with sexual immorality. V'hu lo, and he didn't. So what was his praise before the Mabul? Everybody else was acting poorly. They were stealing, they were sexually immoral, and he wasn't. Avalachar Mabul, what was his big praise after the Mabul? Hayukulam gedurim marayos. You have to picture the only people right after the Mabul was his sons who were just through the whole flood story. Uprishim Hamas, and they were separated from ripping each other off. Amnam tamim, but he was still tamim. Anav ushval ruach, as Rashi puts it, he was modest and saw himself as lowly, as nothing special. B'daro ein chashivas she'eslam lo haya chashuv tzaddik. In the first generation, this wasn't, thinking himself lowly was no big deal, because nobody valued the fact that he was a tzaddik. Why? That wasn't their lifestyle. It wasn't what was important to them. After Avalachar Mabul, but after the flood, Shenishar Levado, he remained alone. Hashem Diberimo, Hashem spoke to him. He was a Navi. Ubarcho gave him a bracha. Hitzilo saved him. Vayazonu Mefarnes Kol Ha'olam, and it was in his merit that the whole world was fed and supported. V'lo haya miska'eh az, then he didn't have this big ego trip. Haya nechshav b'masha haya anav. Then what made him significant, what made him important, is that he was an anav. L'chein amar, therefore it says, this is what's it called? The beginning of the next parak, beginning parak Zayin. V'haya Hashem l'Noach. Hashem said to Noach, Bo ata v'chol beischa el teva, all of you should come to the teva, ki oscha re'isi tzadik, lefanai, a tzaddik before me, bedor hazeh, in this generation. So the Meshekh Chokhmah says, notice that going into the Teva, he says, bedor hazeh, v'tamim lo zachar. He doesn't mention that how wonderful it was that he was tamim, because the greatness of his tamimus, of his character, only showed up once people valued what kind of person he was. What's interesting about this is there's a tefillah that we say near the beginning of Shacharis. The tefillah, it says, "La'olam yehei adam," a person should always be Yirei Shamayim, a God-fearing person. My father likes to read it, "La'olam yehei adam," should always be a mensch, Yirei Shamayim, who's also a God-fearing person. B'seiser u'v'galoi, both in private and in public. What's the big deal about being in public? Well, first of all, there are nusachot that took out in public because it was too embarrassing to those who had conversos, Inquisition victims who hid their Judaism. But the original text and most nusachot have restored the word v'galoi in public. So in public actually poses two opposite challenges. When you're living in a society where most people are fellow Yirei Shamayim, so then the challenge is to keep anava, because they know how good, they value what it is when you're acting good. And so you have to be happy. This metaphor just struck me. You have to be happy being a Hufflepuff and not a Gryffindor. Not everybody has to be the hero that saves the world. The quiet, loyal friends, the good people, this is what the world runs on. So that's the challenge when the society around you is good. Obviously, the challenge when the society around you is full of Hamas, is self-destructive, is to resist and still act in the way that you know is good and not bow to peer pressure. The other thing I notice in this description is that there's a contrast to a pasuk in Micha. The pasuk in Micha says, "Higid l'cha Adam." Let me tell you, man, ma tov, what is good? Uma Hashem dorish mincha, and what does Hashem demand of you? Kiyim, it's just. And kind of, you typically laugh when you see Kiyim here. Asos mishpat, to do justice. Avas chesed, to love loving kindness. Vatsnei alechet im Elokecha, and to walk modestly with your God. Now, if you notice that the Meshekh Chokhmah is emphasizing, the Gemara and the Rashi said it first, that Noach actually demonstrates two of these three credos. He is doing mishpat because he avoids chamas, he avoids destructive behavior, he avoids ripping other people off, and he is hatznei alechet im Elokecha because he's an anav, even in a generation where it's his doing that anybody exists, and he could just lord it over everybody. He's the example everybody's following, and he doesn't think that he's the be-all and end-all of creation. But Avas Chesed is missing. And perhaps that is why Judaism doesn't start with Noach. It starts with Avraham. Because what is Avraham most known for? The Avas Chesed, the loving of kindness. So I thought it was interesting that he's an exemplar of two of the three things that Micha says sums up the entire Torah. And what's the one element that's missing? The one element that Avraham, the first Jew, is most known for. There's another thing here where we talk about the character that Noach had, because in next week's parsha, in Vayera, the Meshekh Chokhmah makes a similar point about Sheim, Noach's son. He points out that the name of the city, Yerushalayim, is put together. This he doesn't point out again. It's the Gemara. Is put together from two city names. Melchizedek called the city Shalem. Melchizedek Melech Shalem. Melchizedek was the king of the city called Shalem, whole. And Avraham gets there. He goes to the mountain. He calls the name of the place where the mountain is, Har Hashem Yireh, the mountain where God will be seen, which the pasuk continues, Asher Yomer Hayom, which is said about today, Bar Hashem Yireh, the mountain where Hashem is seen. And we learn from this that this is Yerushalayim, that the mountain is the mountain is Mount Moriah, Har Moriah, where the Beis Hamikdash eventually stands. So he calls so Melchizedek, who our sages identify with Sheim, calls the city Shalem, and Avraham adds a second element of God. So Melchizedek understands the importance of character because he was raised by the post-flood Noach. I mean, he was also raised by the pre-flood Noach, but that's not what's relevant here. What's relevant here is that he spent a year taking care of all the animals, and then he was around Noach afterwards, and therefore he identified the place where God is present in Shlemut, in wholeness. Now, Avraham realizes that wholeness can't be separated from Yirat Hashem, from a fear and awe of God. It's not enough to be whole. One has to be whole because it's your calling. It's what you were made to be. And so the two together, when you get the perfection of character and the perfection of worldview, that is when you get to Yerushalayim. And again, so we see that there are three elements, but it's not exactly the three elements that we highlighted in Micha. Here we see there are three elements. There's the correct behavior, which Noach exemplified before the flood because he did it despite his environment. There is the correct character, which is the essential element that the world was rebuilt upon. And then there is the underpinning to the character, the understanding that completes the picture. Still, the Torah doesn't stand on understanding. It stands on Avas Chesed. The missing pillar from the Noach generation was the love of Chesed. And Avraham, by seeing Hashem's Chesed, was able to add that or use that in his definition of Shlemut, of Tmimut, so that he had a Tmimut that was different than Noach's, because to say one is perfect requires knowing perfect at what. A perfect pen is good at something different than a perfect hammer is. Avraham, when he saw that everything that exists because God provides it, was able to add Avas Chesed to the mixture, produce the magic formula that Micha uses to summarize all of the Torah. And again, if it were not for the flood and the opportunity that Noah had of establishing a society that behaved correctly, we never would have had that same opportunity to be founded on Tmimut, which is where this week's Parsha ends. So although we looked at all three elements, the behavior, the character, and then the picture of what developing one's character is supposed to end up, this week's Parsha ends